Kutu katoa, ko Jon Reedand Hannah. Welcome to this edition of Water New Zealand's podcast series, Tāwara o Te Wai. I'm Jon Reed from Water New Zealand. Today we're going to talk about collaboration in the water sector and how this might enable us to overcome some of the challenges we face in Aotearoa or around the world. We're joined today by two guests, Amanda Lake and Chris Thurston. Amanda is a process engineer who's had fun in the water sector since diving in back in 2001 in Brisbane, Australia. She's now based in Edinburgh, Scotland, and is a global principal for Jacobs, where she leads work on water sector decarbonisation and the circular economy. Chris is a sustainability professional who has been working in the water sector for the last 7 years. For much of that, he was head of sustainability for Watercare, based in Auckland, and he's passionate about how organisations can proactively integrate climate change considerations into their future direction. We're very pleased to have both Amanda and Chris with us on the podcast today. Kia ora, Amanda, Chris and Hannah.
Kia ora, Jon.
Kia ora, Jon. Kia ora, Hannah. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great to be here.
Thanks for joining us today. Hannah, over to you.
Thanks, Jon. Welcome, Amanda and Chris. It's fantastic to be having this conversation with you today. I know we've talked for quite a while about how we were going to run this podcast and what angle we were going to take on it. So I guess to dive in deep at the beginning, there's actually quite a few challenges that we know are facing us in the water sector in New Zealand as well as globally, whether it's climate change or the challenges around funding or resource shortages. We all know about the aging infrastructure challenges that we've got. Overall, in your experience, what brings people together from different organisations and backgrounds to try and solve some of these problems?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think that the challenge is often, in my experience, the reason why we bring this collaboration together. We don't know the answer ourselves. Often it's a broader system challenge. It's not just a specific technical challenge that could be solved by putting a bit of effort at it. It's actually the exploration that's required. It's thinking with different perspectives and bringing them in across the different touch points in an industry, like I say, a bit of a systems approach. And that those sort of common goals mean that you do have to think differently and work differently, and often a collaborative approach gives you that opportunity to do so.
I guess there's an argument about having the best people across the entire sector rather than just going to one particular individual or one particular organisation. You actually get the opportunity to pick from across the sector where all those expertise are and make sure that you get the best of the bunch.
Yeah, I think diversity, like having diverse teams, really, so much more successful. And I think we need to be more kind of cross-disciplinary in the water sector, because we aren't going to solve these, kind of missions or big challenges without that. I really feel like the most interesting teams to be part of are the ones that are most diverse, but also challenging then, because everyone's sometimes speaking different languages, and you've got to try to come together on the same page in some way.
To jump in on that as well, I think sometimes when the challenge doesn't have a specific owner, so there might be lots of different people who want to have an influence on it, and often that also links in with funding, which I think is an interesting question on collaboration, because there might not be a piece of work available here, but a lot of people think that it's something that we need to work on together. So therefore people come together to think about how you can solve it, and often that can be unfunded, and there's definitely examples where it's funded as well, but often it's not, and that does bring its own beauty of collaboration as well.
And with that funding, an example of, I guess, being the gas emissions from the wastewater treatment plant, then when we first did the guidelines around that, it was partly funded by Water New Zealand and partly funded by the organisations who were contributing to it, as well as some pro bono work. So there's all sorts of different models that can be put in place. But overall, it really requires some kind of agreement to that overall goal, whether it's a social contract or a formal contract.
Yeah, I thought for the guidelines that we developed here in New Zealand for wastewater treatment, it started from a group of volunteers who said there's issues that we have from across the sector. There's a need here that's required, and then actually that was able to spin out into a paid piece of work, both a lot of pro bono work and a bit of paid as well that was sourced from within the sector, and I think that was that was great collaboration. It enabled, there was a challenge that was needed, it was identified by a group that came together on a common purpose, and then it spun into some work to enable a pretty complex document to be delivered. So it did need a little bit of a push, I think, to get it over the line, which was great.
Yeah, it's nice to have the agility to be able to do that, and also the initial enthusiasm, but then also the fact that there's some actual funding to do it, because that can be a challenge with these collaborative groups, is that they otherwise happen on people's own time. And we spend, particularly if we work in climate, I think, and in the water sector, there's it's hard to fit all you want into the day, so it can be really challenging to fit these really engaging groups that you want to be part of. So I think when you can find the synergies and actually make it part of paid work, or make it in synergy with paid work you're doing, and try to make it as inclusive and useful as possible, and you can kind of, I don't like killing birds with stones at all, but you can kind of tick more boxes and make it more impactful.
It's important to find those ways of actually making it work. There's a sort of the high ideal of, yep, we want to make this thing happen, we want to achieve this benefit for the industry, but actually making it work and actually coming up with something in practice can be really tough. And like I say, if it's left to people's own time, then often it can all slip and disappear and run away. So I don't know if you've got any ideas about how to do that well.
Is that why your paper, that might be why your guidelines got done first, Chris, because it ended up as a paid bit of work, whereas the white paper I'm and colleagues are working on with International Water Association right now has been dragging on for what feels like years. So that's interesting. It's sorry, I don't have an answer to that, Jon, but I was just contrasting, because we've ended up doing somewhat similar things. I think yours is New Zealand water focused, but also of global relevance, and what we're trying to do within the International Water Association Climate Smart Utilities subgroup on greenhouse gas monitoring is a similar kind of white paper for utilities to get some really practical experience. But it's just, it's a great group of people and they're all like leading in their fields, but it's just takes so long.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll pick up on that point. There was two things on this monitoring guide that I think were tips that helped us. One that we didn't always necessarily do well, but evolved, was the real clear purpose and objective. And how this played out was who the audience is, because the topic is vast and people are at many different levels of maturity on it. So trying to get that right was evolved the document quite a lot. And then in the end, we just really clearly had this mantra of trying to give decision ready information for an audience who was a utility. So it's okay, how do we make that and that therefore delivered the next step, and actually with heaps of incredible technical input from many colleagues, then landed on two people's job to bring it together, and they were the finishers, and that was pretty important to make sure that a finished document did play out.
Yeah, I think I've also seen the benefit of just having bite-sized chunks for people, because it's like, I mean, climate change, the whole industry, it's a huge problem. So if we can get this down to these guidelines, and then a couple of people are writing just this section, you can achieve that. That is something that you can achieve. And so if you can sort of get it down to those bite-sized chunks for people, it can really help, I think. And then we mentioned, I think earlier, that idea of a social contract. So if you've got that team and they're holding each other to account to deliver this thing, I think that can also be a really important piece. Is there anything else that you've seen from your travels around the sort of the sector?
When I was working with Watercare, we delivered a nitrous oxide reduction strategy, and to do that we recognised that we didn't have the experience ourselves. We didn't think there was any one individual that had all the answers, so we created a panel, and we're absolutely stoked and proud to have Amanda as part of that panel. And we set ourselves a deadline, so there was a sort of a March deadline. I think it was sort of 6 months of work, which helped. But that social contract and coming together was important, and what we employed in that was there were 6 on the panel, global experts from academia, from utilities, from startups, really interesting, and from other utilities as well. And we got them working in pairs on small pieces of work, and that meant that it wasn't the group's responsibility, because that could fall through the cracks, but it also wasn't one person's responsibility. They both had support, but they're also proud of their work, and they wanted to make sure that they did it well when they had another person that was a peer working with them, and making sure that they didn't, fall behind either as the two or individually within that. So those couple of tricks I think helped and enabled us in the end to create what we believe was the first utility nitrous oxide reduction strategy with a group of people that we wouldn't have been able to have the input on if we didn't have sort of such a collaborative panel.
What you Watercare did well was also encouraging that collaborative working and the smaller groups as well, but also having those regular touch points and calls. And as a member of the panel, I felt the pressure with these other amazing people to make sure I was really trying to contribute. And I think it was that was a positive time pressure and a little bit of tension as well. But and the fact that it was we weren't bringing our companies, or we were just bringing ourselves to that group, or those often late night or early morning calls given the time zones, and just trying to bring the best insights we could for the sake of what you were trying to do.
Amanda, I've worked both in the New Zealand and the UK water industries, and know the difference in the scale really, and in terms of research and what goes on. I don't know if you could make a comment for our New Zealand listeners about sort of the different ways that you might go about research and development and these investigations in a much bigger industry, for example, in the UK or globally.
Yeah, there's some really interesting. There's the UCWI, the UK Water Industry Research Organisation in the UK and Ireland, and then the Water Research Foundation in North America. And I think those are interesting water industry entities because they support collaborative research quite at different scales though. So often the WRF projects are perhaps a few $100,000. The UCWI one's more likely around the maybe $50,000 kind of mark. And I think so obviously one sometimes it's more desktop based than actual practical research, but I think the interesting thing is both of them are collaborative vehicles, and multiple utilities are part of them. For the WRF ones in North America, I think it's nice because multiple companies and utilities and other parties can be part of these quite large projects. I think they're always challenging to set up, and when you talk about things like sharing data collaboratively, this can bring in a whole lot of challenges with collaboration agreements or IP and all of this. So that can take, I think we often underestimate the amount of time and resource that can take to navigate. And then I think leading these projects is really exciting, or being part of the teams is, but it's it's such a big task in coordination, and it can be, particularly when they're global ones, trying to find the right times to bring people together, and even just trying to sometimes we speak different languages in water and wastewater treatment, and trying to get the sort of equivalent information. But there's one project that I'm particularly excited about that is around nitrous oxide monitoring, and it's a WRF Water Research Foundation project that's really just kicked off, and I think we've got 4 utilities who are providing who are doing monitoring for that project at one of their wastewater facilities, but then another 20 or so who are contributing data and sort of information across the globe. And so this has really only started in earnest, but it'll be really interesting to see how we can try to and we've got this amazingly collaborative kind of advisory group of people volunteering in their time as well. So I think there's some exciting projects on the topic of nitrous oxide underway like that. And I think the interesting thing there is that globally, as we've just heard from Chris, I mean, you guys are leading the world there in terms of a mitigation strategy, but no one has all of the answers. And there's interesting pockets around the world where people are doing different things. The WRF project I just mentioned, there's the funding there, but actually some of the most progressive work is in the Nordics. And then actually in the UK, where I'm based now, we've finally got, excitingly, a few £100 million worth of funding to mitigate nitrous oxide. So it's interesting to see. It will be interesting to see how some of this collaborative work plays out, and I think it'll be most beneficial if we can continue to share it both within those projects, but also with the global community, because no one has all of the answers here.
But I think that's a really interesting point. The reason that we need the collaboration is that no single entity or single person has all of the answers, and therefore we need to be working together over the broader reach of all of the expertise across Tāwara and globally to be able to come up with the right solutions to these answers. And also, isn't it incredible that there are global groups as well as more local groups that are able to do that and to make sure that we are collaborating? There's some bits in there I just wanted to pick up on. So you're talking there about some incredibly funded projects, and we also, on the opposite end of the spectrum, often find, especially in the grassroots, the smaller scale, that people are trying to resolve some really important problems that are self-funded or even pro bono work. And as we were talking about before, I guess, Amanda, can you maybe comment on some of your experiences in the comparison of the two? I guess they're two extreme models, but where are the benefits of doing the different types of model? Ideally, we all want to get paid for the work, but there's definitely some challenges in making sure that that always happens, especially when you're starting to get the momentum up.
Yeah, it's interesting to see some of the pro bono work that I'm involved in along a similar lines to what Chris mentioned with the start of the Water New Zealand nitrous oxide guidelines, I think was voluntary. And so right now, as part of this International Water Association Climate Smart Utilities group, we're producing some guidance for utilities. And I guess we can it's an open and inclusive group, but it tends to be a core group of a few people who are really able to contribute and keen to contribute. And I think we have freedom in terms of what we include there. Often when it's a paid bit of work, the scope and the outline or the purpose is often predetermined. And sometimes that's, particularly in an area where we're all still learning, if you've got a really structured set of terms of reference or requirements for a project, it may be that are they even the right questions? And sometimes you don't have a chance to really revisit those. You just have to respond to them in your paid bit of work, and of course you can try to manipulate it and make it as impactful as possible. But I think obviously the benefit is that you can do it during your 9 to 5 job, whereas often the unpaid stuff falls outside of that. But I think where there can be synergies between the two of them, and where I guess where the paid collaborative work can really include co-creating the scope and the project, that can be very impactful. And we see some of that here. There's some sort of larger paid funded, they're called innovation funded projects, where the utilities and supply community can really come together and basically make a pitch for some funding for a particular project that people feel strongly about, or that utilities, so a utility needs to lead it, but it can have multiple partners, and it's looked on favourably to have many partners. This is then a challenge because you've got a lot of groups involved, but I think that can work very well when you can kind of co-create the project. I
think that co-creation is really interesting. I think often within the voluntary space, you do get people together. You start thinking about this, whatever group you're in, and you've got a sort of general banner or direction, but actually because you've got limited time and resource, then you try and funnel it down to where enough people in the group are passionate about that one thing to keep it going. And in the group, some people might fall off at that point because that's not the thing that they thought they were going to be involved in under that banner. And I think you've got to be real just honest about that, because you are taking your time, and sometimes those people, in my experience, still want to turn up. They still want to sit in the background and listen, and I think that's sweet as well. But you've just got to make sure that you're not whether you're clear on who actually is contributing, and that passion piece is often the one that sort of brings them all together into an individual area to work on it. And I guess I'd also reflect on that with two hats that I've worn recently, transitioning from being in-house in a utility at Watercare to now sort of running my own consulting firm, and the way you spend your time is different between those two. But in reality, even when you're in-house, you're still got opportunity cost on the time that you're spending in a collaborative group, and you've got to make sure that it's worthwhile for the sector, for your direction on what you're doing at your utility or in-house. And then I guess when you're more in a consulting side of things, your opportunity cost is paid work and what you might be doing for a client, but you're probably still just as passionate about it, doesn't mean that you're changing your passion about you want the sector to improve or anything like that. So I think there is just different ways of approaching that with for different people, and sometimes that may result in it being paid, or sometimes it may result in people saying, actually, opportunity cost at the moment is too high, and that's all good as well. Maybe they'll come back at a later point.
So any more practical examples of how to collaborate and work together? Anything that you've picked up over the years from your experience?
It was just around time zones, and this is for real specifically for the N2O strategy. We had south here in Edinburgh, we had Brisbane, New York, Denmark, and Belgium. So I think we've got five different, New Zealand obviously, so I think we've got 5 different time zones in there, and we recognise that the challenge in getting the Brisbane and the New York together was just actually impossible. And there's actually an adage that reminded me of this in football, which is you might have the best player, but if they're injured all the time, then they're not the best player. They're not the best person for the team. And as a Liverpool fan, Diogo Jota, amazing footballer, but often injured, so it's frustrating. And we had this situation as well. We had amazing people, but sometimes you couldn't have them contributing just because they're unavailable due to those time zones. It was 3 in the morning, so you don't expect it to happen. And when we set up the best people, we sort of recognised that time zones would be a challenge, but we didn't think to that specifics. And probably we would have changed it so it wasn't so extreme for 2 people, because that's a shame, because you're sort of choosing between one and the other, or wherever the biggest people are most available. But I think that was a learning that we could have done better on for sure.
Yeah, I think some things, I think giving people different avenues to contribute. I mean, not everyone works well on a small, even if you nice time zone, getting everyone to contribute whether it's in a regular call or a certain kind of format of communication, I think can be sometimes exclusive. And I feel I love talking, and I often feel I dominate. You dominate the certain people who will are like me and are passionate and keep talking, and then there's others who've got just as much, if not more, to contribute, who might not feel as comfortable contributing in that same way. So I think something I'd like to think I've learned, but I would say something I'm really still working on is how to create space, and the awkward silence, or an acronym I learned recently is WAIT, and it stands for why am I talking? And that's I feel like that's important. I think also being vulnerable, and Chris's example of that N2O strategy, people were learning from each other, and I think being vulnerable about what you don't know is important for collaboration, because it shows a side of you that I think helps support genuine connection, and I think that's really important as well. So that human side of it that is definitely not easy on teams, but I think there's I don't know all the answers, but those are some of the things that are often on my mind.
That ties us in quite nicely with what we were talking about earlier. I think Chris mentioned around honesty, of whether you've got the availability yourself and whether you actually have the bandwidth to support. I know there's definitely been times when I've been really passionate about things, but realised that I have to step back because I don't have the bandwidth to do that and all of the other things that I'm really excited about doing. So to be part of those teams, especially those grassroots teams, it's really important to make sure that you know what you do know and you're honest about it. You also know what you don't know, and you know where you're best to spend that time. It's ultimately just really good teamwork, isn't it?
Well, it's something that I have seen work really well in the collaborative spaces is involving more younger people, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is sometimes there's maybe more chance for them to have time, so that's good. It can mean that they're more available. The two-way learning's epic, really supports the young person to get an insight into the industry or the sector or whatever by learning not only of the people that are closest to them in their organisation, but from a wider group. And normally they're pretty comfortable working in these sorts of environments, and it helps us as well learn from their perspective. Now within that, sometimes you do have to have some sort of guidelines and guide rules, and we've looked previously at within a committee structure, quite formalized, bringing in a younger person and recognizing that you actually have to not quite guardrails but enabling enabling things to make sure that's possible. And time, like the time of the day, is really important. The hierarchical structure, creating space for them to talk. They will work differently, as everyone will work differently on whether they will speak up or whether they want to contribute afterwards. So yeah, I think that provides a really different perspective on the collaboration, and then giving them the permission, and everyone the permission to speak up or speak their mind. What is the saying? Like, there's no silly question, but there's no silly input either, and it might even just change the way we think about stuff. So yeah, I'm pretty interested in that too.
Any other ideas about sort of tools we can use to help collaborate, or other techniques?
Yeah, I reckon technology has really helped us in this space, and thinking back a few years when we're probably trying to meet in person to get a number of this work done every quarter or whatever it might be. Whereas now Teams is pretty commonplace, shared folders and working documents that you can work on. I'm not an expert, but Meadow boards or Miro boards are pretty good ways for people to sort of have that virtual whiteboard as well, and bring together from, be able to access people from across time zones, countries, different places, without having to all fly to come together. So I think that's really worked us forward. We wouldn't have been able to do what we've done, or the groups I've been involved in, absolutely without it.
I think it's really interesting that I can see lessons through all of what we've been talking about today, about things we can take forward in terms of working together and making sure we've got good collaboration when we're working on projects of all sorts of different scales. We've talked about a fair amount about the process emissions. I guess that's because there's a lot of our experience in that space, but there's actually a lot of other groups, and Water New Zealand have quite a few of the special interest groups, so it's definitely worth checking that out on their website. So it's pretty amazing that there are groups out there for people who are passionate about all of these different things. But do you think we're going to see more and more of this type of work and these working relationships in the future as we go forward?
Yeah, for sure. I think whilst the challenges remain that aren't just purely technical in their solution, then bringing people together and diverse thought is going to be super important to enable it to happen. And I think there's enough recipes to suggest that it works well and that it's doable. There's enough lessons learned to suggest there's some things that you can stay away from. And I think as long as the challenge is there and people are passionate about working on it, then these groups will either naturally or perhaps more structurally come together.
Yeah, I agree. And I actually learned today there's an ISO standard for collaboration, which you guys might have been well aware of, but I certainly didn't know. And I'm out to learn how that might help provide some guardrails or guidance for a collaborative project. But I think we need it. I think there's no way we'll solve the kind of challenges we have within the water sector without more collaboration, both of the voluntary type that builds connections in passionate people, but that hopefully can then spin out into business as usual.
Thanks very much, Amanda and Chris, for joining us today. It was fascinating to talk about this subject. Hopefully people can learn some of those lessons and apply them to be able to collaborate better together in the future. Thank you for listening to this latest episode. We'll be back next month with our next podcast.